here to cover the array section of chapter 20. Let's go through what we've covered in chapter 20. So far we've covered loops. Loops was something that we did to iterate and process commands over and over again until we reached a condition to exit out of the loop. So we talked about infinite loops. We talked about how to trace through the loop, figure out what the different values of the variables were during each iteration going through the loop. Now we're going to be talking about arrays. So we'll be talking about array declarations, initialization, indexing of the arrays, the length of the arrays, and we'll be using what we used from the last class with loops to be able to process the arrays. So let's start. So what's an array? An array is a collection of like data elements that helps us to organize data. They can hold more value, more than one value at a time. So you might be finding it useful to think of it as a group of variables. The same rules or conventions that you use to name variables also apply to arrays. There's a lot of similarities on how you set the variables and work with the variables. So let's go to the next page. So we have an example here. In this case, we're naming the array hours worked. And here, you can see it's indexed. So it's indexed from 0 to 5. There's 6 elements, and the index starts with 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to be looking at all of the data within each of these, what I'll call buckets. Right, so each bucket within the array has some data inside of it. In this case, they're numbers. So it's 50, 75, 0, 5, 12, and 60. So here you can see the declaration for the array. So var hours worked, and you're going to say new, right? And then you're going to say array with 6 elements in it. This is important here where you have a capital A for the array. Okay, so as I said here, creates 6 indexed elements or buckets, and the index always starts with 0. Okay, now to look at a particular element within the array, you would look at the index. So you would say hours worked, open bracket, 3, and close bracket. And when you do that, the value that you pull out from that bucket is 5. Okay, and if I want to assign something different to it, you would just basically say hours worked, open bracket 3, close bracket, and then you'll put an equal sign, and then you assign whatever number you want to put in there. Okay. Another part of this is the length, right? So you can call hours worked dot length, and what that will return is a value of 6, right? So that's telling you that this array has 6 elements inside of it. Okay, that's the size of the array. Okay, so the first element you would call it at index 0, and the last element would be the length of the array minus 1. Right, so you can see the last element here is 5. Right, so the length of the array is 6, and then if you want to access the last element, it's 6 minus 1 for 5. Okay, before I continue on, let me try to run some code here. So here I have some code. You can see var hours worked, new array of 6, and this is just one way of assigning values here. So just like when I was talking about here, where you put the equal sign for each of the elements here, and you set the values. So hours worked, the first element is 0, and I did an assignment of 50 to it. So 50, 75, 0, 5, 12, and 60. So I assign it to each element like that. Okay. Now here, I'm going to do a document write, and I'm showing the length, right? So I did the hours worked dot length to show the length of the array. Here, I'm doing the for loop, right? So there's the same for loop that we did from the last class. So I equals to 0, and here this is where the length comes in handy. So I did I is less than the hours worked dot length. And then here is the same thing as what we've been using. We've done incrementer on the I, so it's I plus plus. Okay. Within each loop, all we're going to do is do a document write to print out each element of the array. So remember the first time going through the for loop, I equals to 0. So hours worked, 0. And then the next one will be 1, and so on, all the way up until it gets to the 5th element. Okay, so if I do a run here, you can see up here I did 6 is the length of the array. So that's right here. Okay, so it told me the hours worked dot length is equal to 6. And then down here, I'm going through each element of the array, 50, 75, 0, 5, 12, and 60. Right, that's what this does here. Now let me uncomment this part here. I just wanted to kind of show you that there's another way to print out the array. So if now I run this, that's all this down here. So I print out the entire array just by referring to the array within this document write, and it just printed out the whole array here. Okay, let me comment this part out now. And we go to here. What I'm doing here, I'm assigning the values. Right up here, you can see I did the assignment like this with the equal sign here. Now I'm assigning it as comma separated values here. So now you see hours worked again equals, and then I put in brackets all the different values I want to assign. So in this case, I'm just going to go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And then I do a document write again to show the whole array. So let's see what happens when I do that. You can see 10 through 50 displaying the whole array. Okay, so this is just another way for you to assign the values into this array that we've defined. Now the other thing that we can do is we can add to the end of the array. So once you've defined the array to be 5 elements or 6 elements or whatever, you're not stuck with just that many buckets. You can add on to it or you can subtract from it. So let me take this out here. So with this bit of code that I have here, what I'm doing is I'm doing hours work and I'm doing a push. Right? Push is what I'm going to do to append to the end of the array. So now I create a new bucket and I put a value of 60 in there, added to the end. Okay, and if I print that out, you'll see like it's 60 to the end. And then I did another push, so hours work, push, 80. And if I display that, you'll see the 80. Now, let's say I decided that actually I want to take out the 80, take out the last element, then I'll use this command, pop. Right, so push is to add to the end of the array, pop is to take out elements from the end of the array. Let's see what happens when we run this code. Okay, so if we follow along here, we initialize all the values, took it up to 50, which is what we did here before. Now I did the push of the 60, which is what you see here, and then I did a push of 80, that's what you see here. Okay, now when I did the pop, by popping, what I pull out is this value of 80. and then it did the hours worked, and you can see 10 through 60. Right, so not only did I just display the last element by doing a pop, I actually took the element off the array. Now the size of the array only goes up to 60, not to 80 like it did before. Okay, so this is how you do a push or add to the end of the array, and this is how you take a pop or take a value off the end of the array. So let's comment this out for a second. Okay, so I got this lined up to here. Let's come back over to here. Right, so this is just assigning the value for weekdays. So again, you have the weekdays, and then you have all your different index here, and these are just assigning strings into these buckets. So it doesn't have to be numbers that we've just been working with. So you can put in Monday all the way down to Sunday here. Okay. So if you take a moment to think about it, weekdays 2 of 3, right? That's this element here. So when I do this alert here, what you would expect is that it will print out Wednesday. So now we just have a different way to look at these indexes here. So before I just allocate like 0 all the way down to 6. Here you can see I've defined this variable do and assign that equals to 2. Right? And there's many different ways for you to incorporate that into your index here. Right? You could just refer to it as 2 here, and you'll get that. You'll be assigning dopey to it. Here is 2. Remember, do is 2. 2 plus 1, that makes it 3 for sneezy. 2 times 2 makes it 4. Right? 3 times 2 minus 1 is 5. And here 2 times 2 is 4. 10 minus 4 is 6. Okay. So I did the same code here. So let's see what we get when I pull that out. Okay. So I assign this value. I assign the array for dwarf, and we assign the value for do is 2. And you can see all the references to those variables for these indexes here. And then I did a write for this element of the array, do plus 1. So let's see what we get here. Okay, so now we got sneezy is the reference. So let's see where is sneezy. Sneezy is over here, and you can see do plus 1, or the third element, okay, or the third name. It's actually the fourth element, right? So here, do plus 1. Do plus 1 is sneezy, so that's what you would expect when you print it out. Okay. Okay, so there's another example here. And I incorporated that to here also. Okay, so math answers, we just defined a new array, same as what we've been doing. And we've done another for loop, right? So we did the size of the math answers array, same as before, I equals to 0. So I is less than the length of the array, and I plus plus, the increment. Now all we do is each time as we go through, we're going to assign a value into each element of the array, I times 3. Okay, so let's see what that puts out. So as you can expect, it would come out as 0, 3, 6, and 9. So multiples of 3. So the first time through, the first element for math answers, we're going to assign 0 times 3, which makes that to be 0. The second time through, it'll be a 1. So the first element of math answers is 1 times 3, makes it 3, and so on and so forth. That's why you get 0, 3, 6, and 9 when you print this out. Okay. Okay. So now we're back to allocating various strings into an array. So in this case, I created an array called people, right? So a new array, and I did like I did before, where we allocated comma separated values, right? So Joe, Mary, Tom, Elisa, Ed, Dana, Rohan. And then we did a for loop, right? So another for loop where the I is less than the length of the array. And then we did incrementer. So let's see what we get here. Alright, so it's what we expect. We got Joe, Mary, Tom, Elisa, Ed, Dana, and Rohan, which we printed out as we go through each of these loops or iterations. Okay, so now we're going to do something here. We're going to use our random number generator. We're going to still use that same array, people, and we're going to declare this variable, lucky num, and what's going to go in there is going to be the output of this pick a random number. So this is a function, and what goes into that function? All right, we're going to pass argument people.length. Okay, so we're going to print out the result. It's going to be lucky one is, and then whichever result we got from the lucky num, that element of the array. So here's the function. So the function is pick random num, and I just declared range. Okay, so when I call this function, I'm going to pass in some value. That's going to be the range, or basically the size of the array. And then here, I'm declaring a new random variable, a number, which is basically going to be, I'm taking the random and multiplying at the range. Okay, so you remember what the random function does. It goes between 0 and 1, multiply it by the range, and then we do the floor of that to round it to the next lowest number relative to this. And then we're going to return that out of the function. Okay, so what that means is when I come back here from this pick random number, pick random num, it's going to assign a value. That value is basically one of the random elements of the array. Okay, so let's see what that comes out with. In this case, we're saying the lucky one is Tom, right? So Tom is this element here, so it's 0, 1, 2. Okay, so we would say this returned a 2 when it came back. All right. If I want to show something here, let me see document dot write, and then let me say rand. Right, let's see what we get here. Let me do that. Okay, so you can see here 5 is this value here, right? So I did this and the random number ended up being 5. So let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's why the lucky one is Dana, right? That's what comes out when we do this print. The lucky one is, and then people, the fifth element within the people array is Dana, okay? So I think we're done with this. So let me take this out, and I'll take out this one. Okay, so this one we set up to take a button to print it out. So it's basically just having the JavaScript defined up here like what we had. So let me open this back up again and uncomment this. Take this out. So this is the HTML at the bottom here. And I'm gonna take out this part here. Okay, so now you remember the button from previous lectures. So we're gonna have on click. We recognize the function we declared further up, which is pick random num, right? And the people.length is also defined up in the script section. And then we define our own variable here, lucky num, which is the result of calling this function. Okay, and then here we're going to print out same thing as we did up here, but now this is from the HTML. So people, and then say open bracket lucky num close bracket, right? And that's what the lucky one is. Okay, now you can see here we've defined person, so we're going to do document element by ID person in our HTML, and then we say the lucky person is, and then we say the lucky one, which is this. Okay, so this is how we access the array value from HTML. So let's come up here. Oh, I left the lucky one is Mary up here. Let me do a choose, and it says the lucky person is Ed, right? So this button here, choose, is right here, this HTML here. All it's doing is accessing those functions and variables that we define further up here in our example here. And then we took the output all of that and we set inner HTML to be this value to print it out. Okay, so it's two different ways you can use to print out. What we did was all within the JavaScript. Here is utilizing the HTML to access those functions and variables we defined further up within the script. Okay. Okay, so here we have the end of this section. It's just like a little problem to work through. Actually, I should have done that. I should have done that. comment this out here. So something that at home you guys can practice this a bit, but I kind of whipped up something over here that you can look at for reference. So you can see here, the problem here is to ask you to create an array called days that will have basically within each element each day of the week. Then you're going to have an array to talk about the hours worked for each day of the week. Okay, then you're going to create a function called find total pay, which will return the total pay for the week. Okay, and then the last bit is to find out which day you worked the most hours. So what I did up here, I did days of the week, right, and I defined it, and as part of the definition I assigned all of the values. Okay, here I did hours worked and new array, and then I assigned all those values there. Then I did this, I did a document write, and I said the total pay is, and I said find total pay based on the hours worked. So basically I defined this function here. You can see this function, find total pay, and it takes in the hours. Within here I said total pay, total hours, and a pay rate. Okay, so the first thing I do is I want to run through the whole array and sum up all the hours that we worked. Okay, so basically I said total hour equals the total hour plus hours, and then here's the I, where I equals to 0, and hours w.length, right? This is the array that got passed in, taking the length and the increment. So all this for loop would do is sum up the total hours that's within this array. Then I have to remember on this part here, it says that if you earn time and a half over 40 hours. Okay. Oh yeah, and I also set the pay rate to be $10 an hour. Okay. So if the total hours is greater than 40, that means there was some overtime, right? So if it wasn't greater than 40, that's easy. Then we just say total pay equals the total hours times the pay rate. You can see down here, that's the return. The return will be the total pay. And that's what will get printed out here as a result of this function output, what the value returns. But let's say it is over 40, which in this case it happens that it will be over 40. So you have the initial pay rate, so that's 40 hours times the $10. All right, that's for the first 40 hours, plus we need to know how many hours of overtime they did. So they did total hours minus 40, that's how many overtime hours they did. And we want to multiply that by this pay rate times 1.5, right? So you get time and a half, which is this pay rate times 1.5. That new adjusted pay rate will be multiplied times the overtime hours. So let's see what we get here. Now you get total pay is $490. Okay, so that makes sense. You have this $40, 40 hours times $10 an hour, that's $400 right there. If you add all of this up, they basically did 46 hours. Okay, so 46 hours, you have 6 hours of overtime. All right, so 6 hours of overtime means the $60, which is your regular pay, and a half, which is another $30, which is the 1.5. That's why you end up with a total pay of $490. Okay. Here, which day did you work the most hours? I didn't work that out, but I think you should be able to do that pretty easily. You can write a new function, and you can do a for loop to loop through. You can have a little variable that's always going to be checking each value to see if it's greater than the value that you've stored from before, right? So you loop through and keep on comparing against the one variable which is storing the highest value worked. Eventually you'll find out that you'll get this element here, right? So Wednesday will be the value that has the most hours worked at 10 hours, right? So I'll leave it to you to work on that on your own. If there's any questions, feel free to give me a shout, send me an email, or post an announcement to the group. I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. But that's it for the arrays discussion. Thank you for your time today. And I'm going to see if I can attach a little quiz to the end of this to help reinforce your knowledge for arrays. Thank you.